The blood-stained wanted poster trembled in Natalie Graham's hands as she stood at the edge of Austin, Texas, watching the sun bleed across the horizon like an open wound in the October sky of 1883. She had ridden for 3 weeks straight from Kansas City, her 22-year-old body aching in places she had not known could hurt, all for one purpose that consumed her every waking thought and haunted her fitful sleep. The poster showed a crude sketch of a massive wolf, larger than any natural creature had the right to be, with eyes that seemed to follow whoever looked at the drawing. Below the image, words promised $300 for the beast dead or alive, signed by the territorial governor himself after the animal had killed 17 people across 2 counties in the span of 4 months. Natalie's younger sister Emma had been the 16th victim, torn apart on her wedding day while walking from the chapel to the reception hall in their small Kansas town. The memory of finding Emma's body, still wearing her white dress now painted crimson, had carved something hollow and desperate inside Natalie's chest. Their parents had died 2 years earlier from influenza, leaving the 2 sisters to fend for themselves. Now Emma was gone too, and Natalie had nothing left except the burning need to see this creature dead, and the hope that $300 might give her enough money to start somewhere new, somewhere the nightmares might not follow quite so closely. Austin's Main Street bustled with evening activity as cowboys finished their day's work and headed toward saloons, their spurs creating a strange metallic symphony against the wooden boardwalks. Natalie guided her tired mare toward the sheriff's office, her rifle secured firmly to her saddle, and her father's old Colt revolver heavy on her hip. She had learned to shoot when she was 14, taught by her father, who had always said that a woman needed to know how to protect herself in this wild country. She had never imagined those skills would lead her here, to hunting the most dangerous predator the territory had ever seen. The sheriff's office was a squat building with bars on the windows and a deputy sleeping with his feet propped on the desk inside. Natalie knocked loudly, and the deputy jerked awake, nearly falling out of his chair. He was young, probably not much older than Natalie herself. With a sparse mustache he seemed to be growing in the vain hope it would make him look more authoritative. "Help you, miss?" he asked, straightening his hat. "I am here about the wolf bounty," Natalie said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion pulling at her bones. "I need to know the last confirmed location of the animal." The deputy's expression shifted from sleepy confusion to something between amusement and concern. "Now, miss, that bounty has been up for 2 months, and we have had every seasoned hunter in 3 territories try their hand at bringing that devil down. 5 of them have not come back at all. This is not work for a woman, if you do not mind my saying so." Natalie felt the familiar flash of anger that came whenever someone assumed her gender made her incapable. "I mind your saying so very much, actually. The poster does not specify that the bounty is only available to men. Either tell me what I need to know or direct me to someone who will." The deputy held up his hands in a placating gesture. "No offense meant, truly. It is just that thing is not like any wolf anyone has seen before. It is smart, miss. Real smart. Sets traps for the people hunting it, doubles back on its own tracks, and when it does attack, it is savage in ways that make grown men lose their nerve." He paused, his expression softening. "Look, if you are really set on this fool's errand, you should talk to Jameson Cross. He is the best tracker in the state, maybe the whole territory. He took a group out after the wolf about 3 weeks back, and he is the only one who made it back alive. Been drinking himself to death at the Silver Dollar Saloon ever since." Natalie memorized the name and the location. "Thank you. I will find him." "Miss," the deputy called as she turned to leave. That wolf killed his brother. If Jameson Cross could not bring it down, I do not reckon anyone can." The words followed Natalie out into the cooling evening air, but she pushed them aside. She had not come all this way to be discouraged by well-meaning warnings. The Silver Dollar Saloon was easy to find, its entrance marked by the sound of a poorly tuned piano and raucous laughter spilling into the street. Natalie tied her mare to the hitching post and squared her shoulders before pushing through the swinging doors. The noise died down as every eye in the establishment turned to look at her. Women did not typically enter saloons, not respectable ones anyway, and Natalie could feel the weight of judgment and curiosity pressing against her from all sides. She ignored it, scanning the room until her gaze landed on a solitary figure slumped at a corner table, a nearly empty whiskey bottle before him. The man matched the deputy's description in the way that broken things often match the memory of what they used to be. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble shadowing a face that might have been handsome if not for the haunted look in his blue eyes. His clothes were well made but dusty, and his hat sat on the table beside a gun belt that showed the wear of constant use. Natalie crossed the room with deliberate steps, her boots loud against the wooden floor. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down without waiting for an invitation. "Jameson Cross," he looked up slowly, his gaze unfocused from drink. "Depends on who is asking and why they want to know. My name is Natalie Graham. I came to claim the bounty on the wolf. I hear you are the best tracker in the territory, and I am willing to split the money if you help me find it." Jameson laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. It was bitter and sharp, like glass breaking. Best tracker in the territory could not keep his own brother alive. "What makes you think I would do any better for a stranger?" "Because I am not asking you to keep me alive," Natalie said evenly. "I am asking you to help me track the animal. What happens after that is my own responsibility." He studied her for a long moment, and Natalie met his gaze without flinching. She could see him taking in details: her travel-worn clothes, the determined set of her jaw, the way her hand rested naturally near her weapon. "You have done this before. Hunting, I mean." "I have hunted deer, elk, and once a mountain lion that was killing our livestock. Never a wolf like this one, but I learned fast." "The mountain lion did not kill 17 people and outsmart every professional hunter who went after it," Jameson said, taking another drink directly from the bottle. "This thing is different. It is like it knows what people are going to do before they do it. My brother was the smartest man I knew, and it led him straight into an ambush. Tore him apart while I was close enough to hear him screaming but too far away to help." The pain in his voice was raw and fresh despite the weeks that had passed. Natalie recognized it because she heard the same thing in her own voice when she spoke about Emma. "It killed my sister 4 months ago, on her wedding day. I held her while she died, and I promised her that I would make sure this creature never hurt anyone else the way it hurt her. I am going after it with or without your help, Mr. Cross. But I would have a much better chance of actually succeeding if you came with me." Jameson set the bottle down with a thud. His eyes, though still heavy with drink and grief, showed a flicker of something that might have been respect or might have been curiosity. "You are either very brave or very stupid, Miss Graham. I have not decided which yet. Perhaps I am both." "Does it matter?" "I suppose it does not." He pushed the bottle away and seemed to be wrestling with himself, his jaw working as he ground his teeth together. Finally, he released a long breath. "If I do this, if I agree to help you, you follow my lead out there. No arguments, no hesitation. The wolf is not just dangerous because of its teeth and claws. It is dangerous because it is smarter than it should be. You have to think 3 steps ahead at all times, and even then you might end up dead. Can you accept that? I can. And you can really shoot. Because if we find this thing and you freeze up, we are both dead. In answer, Natalie pulled her father's Colt from its holster with smooth, practiced ease. She checked the cylinder, spun it professionally, and placed it on the table between them with the barrel pointing away from both of them. I can shoot. My father made sure of that before he passed. Jameson looked at the weapon, then back at her face. Something in his expression shifted, the hardness softening just slightly around the edges. We leave at first light. Bring enough supplies for a week in rough country. Extra ammunition, warm clothes because the nights are getting cold, and anything you need for basic doctoring if one of us gets hurt. The last confirmed sighting was 6 days' ride northwest of here, near a stretch of rocky country where the Edwards Plateau meets the hill country. That was 2 weeks ago, but I know how this wolf thinks. It moves in patterns, circles back to areas it has hunted before once enough time has passed that people think it has moved on. I will be ready, Natalie promised, rising from her chair. She hesitated for a moment, then added, "Thank you, Mr. Cross. I know this is not easy for you." "Jameson," he corrected. "If we are going to be tracking a killer wolf together for a week, you might as well use my given name. And Miss Graham, you should know that I am doing this as much for my brother as I am for the money or to help you. That thing took the only family I had left. I want to see it dead almost as much as you do." "Natalie," she said in return, "and I understand completely." She left him there in the saloon and found a modest boarding house where she could rent a room for the night. The landlady was a round, friendly woman who asked too many questions about where Natalie was headed and why a nice young lady was traveling alone. Natalie deflected as politely as she could and retreated to her small room, where she laid out her supplies and took inventory of everything she would need for the hunt ahead. Sleep came reluctantly, broken by dreams of Emma's face and the sound of howling that seemed too close, too real. Natalie woke before dawn, her heart pounding and sweat cooling on her skin despite the chill in the air. She dressed quickly, strapping on her gun belt and gathering her belongings. By the time the first gray light of morning began to paint the eastern sky, she was leading her mare toward the general store to purchase additional supplies. Jameson was already there, looking considerably more sober than he had the previous evening. His eyes were clearer, though no less haunted, and he had cleaned up somewhat. He had also brought a second horse, a sturdy gelding loaded with camping gear and what looked like enough ammunition to fight a small war. "You travel heavy," Natalie observed. "Better to have it and not need it than the reverse," Jameson replied. "Did you sleep? Some. You? Not much. Never do any more." He helped her secure her additional supplies to her mare, his movements efficient and practiced. "We will follow the main road northwest for about half a day, then cut across country. The terrain gets rough, lots of rocky ground and cedar breaks. Good country for an ambush, so we stay alert." They rode out as the sun cleared the horizon, painting Austin in shades of gold and amber. The town was just beginning to wake, shopkeepers opening their doors and early risers heading to work. Natalie wondered how many of them knew about the wolf, how many had lost someone to it. The thought made her grip her reins tighter, her resolve hardening with each mile they put between themselves and civilization. Jameson was not much for conversation during those first hours, and Natalie was content with the silence. She used the time to observe him, noting the way he constantly scanned their surroundings, how his hand never strayed far from his rifle. He rode like someone who had spent most of his life in the saddle, moving with his horse rather than against it. Around midday, they stopped to water the horses at a small creek. Jameson dismounted and checked the ground carefully, reading signs that Natalie could not yet see. "Deer came through here this morning," he said, pointing to tracks she could barely make out. "3 of them, does most likely. No sign of the wolf, but we are still too close to town. It prefers areas where people do not go regularly." "How do you know so much about tracking?" Natalie asked, kneeling to fill her canteen. "My father was a scout for the army before he settled down. He taught me and my brother everything he knew about reading the land, following sign, predicting where game would go. We grew up hunting to feed ourselves, and it just became second nature." His expression darkened. "I just wish all that knowledge had been enough to save Thomas." "Your brother?" Natalie asked gently. "Yeah. Thomas was 2 years younger than me, but you would never know it. He was smarter, braver, better at just about everything. When we heard about the bounty, he was the one who wanted to go after it. I tried to talk him out of it, told him we should let the professional hunters handle it, but he was stubborn. Said we could use the money to buy our own ranch, start breeding horses the way we had always talked about." Jameson's voice caught slightly. "So I agreed, because I could never say no to him. We tracked the wolf for 9 days, got closer than anyone else had. We thought we had it cornered in a box canyon. Turned out we were the ones who had been herded exactly where it wanted us." Natalie waited, sensing he needed to tell this story even though it clearly caused him pain. "The wolf had killed a deer and left it in the canyon, knowing we would think it was feeding and vulnerable. We split up to cover both ends of the canyon, make sure it could not escape. I took the west end, Thomas took the east. I heard the attack before I saw it. The wolf had been waiting in the rocks above Thomas, watching him walk right underneath. By the time I got there, it was too late. The wolf was gone and my brother was dying. He lived long enough to tell me not to follow it alone to get help. Then he was just gone." "I am sorry," Natalie said, and she meant it. "I know those words do not help, but I am truly sorry for your loss. I appreciate that. And I am sorry about your sister. What was her name?" "Emma. She was 19, about to marry a good man who loved her completely. They had plans to move to Colorado, start a family. She was so happy that last day." Natalie felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. "I keep thinking about how random it was. If she had walked a different path, if she had left 5 minutes earlier or later, if any tiny thing had been different, she would still be alive. But I also know that thinking like that will drive me mad, so I try to focus on what I can control." "Which is killing the thing that took her from you," Jameson said. "Exactly." They mounted up and continued riding, the landscape gradually changing as they left the flatter ground behind and entered the rolling hills that characterized this part of Texas. Cedar trees became more common, their twisted trunks and dense foliage creating patches of deep shadow even in the afternoon sun. Jameson led them off the main road and onto what appeared to be little more than a game trail, navigating with the confidence of someone who knew this country well. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Jameson found them a campsite in a small clearing protected on 3 sides by rock formations. "We will stop here for the night. I want to set up a good defensive position before it gets dark." They worked together to establish camp, falling into an easy rhythm despite having just met. Jameson showed Natalie how to position their bedrolls so they each had a clear view of different approaches to the clearing, and he built their fire in a shallow pit that would keep the light from being visible at a distance. Natalie noticed he kept his rifle within arm's reach at all times. "You really think the wolf might find us out here?" she asked as they prepared a simple meal of beans and hardtack. "I think that wolf knows when it is being hunted," Jameson replied. "And I think it is curious enough to come investigate who is foolish enough to be out here looking for it. We need to be ready for anything." They ate in companionable silence as the darkness deepened around them. The night sounds of the wilderness slowly emerged, the chirping of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of small creatures moving through the underbrush. Natalie found herself hyper-aware of every noise, her hand repeatedly straying to her revolver. "Tell me something about yourself that has nothing to do with hunting or death," Jameson said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "I think we could both use a reminder that there are other things in the world." Natalie considered the question. "I used to paint, watercolors mostly. My mother taught me when I was young. I loved capturing the way light looked on water or the exact shade of the sky just before a storm. I have not done it in years, not since my parents died and I had to focus on more practical matters. But I miss it sometimes, the way it made me pay attention to beautiful details I might otherwise overlook." "That is a nice thing to miss," Jameson said. "I bet you were good at it." "I was decent." "Not great, but decent. What about you? What did you do before all of this?" "I was a ranch hand, moved around a lot working different spreads. Thomas and I would save our money, planning for the day when we could afford our own place. We had our eye on a property north of San Antonio, good water and grass, perfect for horses. Thomas was the one with the real vision for it. I was just along for the ride, happy to be working with my brother." He stared into the fire. "Now I do not know what I will do." "The dream does not mean much without him to share it." "Maybe you will find a new dream," Natalie suggested carefully. "Not to replace the old one, but something different, something that honors his memory." "Maybe," Jameson said, though he did not sound convinced. "For now, I just want to make sure that Wolf does not hurt anyone else." They took turns keeping watch through the night, each sleeping in 4-hour shifts while the other maintained the fire and listened for anything unusual. Natalie took the first watch, sitting with her rifle across her knees and her eyes scanning the darkness beyond their small circle of firelight. The hours passed slowly, marked by the gradual movement of stars across the sky. When she woke Jameson for his turn, she was surprised to find that she felt somewhat rested despite the hard ground and her racing thoughts. She wrapped herself in her blanket and fell asleep to the sound of Jameson, humming something soft and low, a melody that sounded like a lullaby. The second day of their journey took them deeper into the hill country, where the terrain became increasingly challenging. They navigated narrow passages between limestone cliffs, forded shallow streams, and climbed steep inclines that tested the strength and sure-footedness of their horses. Jameson continued to check for signs as they traveled, occasionally dismounting to examine tracks or disturbed vegetation more closely. Late in the afternoon, he held up a hand to signal a stop. Natalie guided her mare alongside his gelding and watched as he pointed to something on the ground ahead. "Wolf tracks," he said quietly. "Big ones. Probably 3, maybe 4 days old based on how much the edges have eroded." Natalie could see them now that he had pointed them out. Massive paw prints pressed into the soft earth near a water source. They were easily twice the size of any wolf track she had ever seen, with claw marks that looked more like they belonged on a bear. "We are getting close to its territory," Jameson continued. "From here on, we need to be even more careful. No loud noises, no fires at night unless absolutely necessary. The wolf will be watching for intruders." "How can you be sure it is the same wolf?" Natalie asked. "These could belong to any large animal." "Look at the gait," Jameson said, pointing to the spacing between prints. "See how the rear paw lands slightly ahead of where the front paw was? That is unusual. Most wolves have a more even stride. I saw this same pattern when Thomas and I were tracking it before. This is our wolf." A chill ran down Natalie's spine that had nothing to do with the cooling temperature. Knowing they were this close to the creature that had killed Emma made it feel suddenly very real in a way it had not before. This was no longer an abstract quest for vengeance. This was an actual hunt, and they were tracking something that had proven itself capable of outsmarting and killing experienced hunters. "Are you having second thoughts?" Jameson asked, watching her face. "No," Natalie said firmly. "Just adjusting my expectations." "How much farther do you think we need to go before we find it?" "Hard to say. The wolf does not stay in one place for long. It moves through a circuit that probably covers 100 square miles or more. But these tracks are heading northwest, and I know there is a series of caves about half a day's ride in that direction. Wolves like caves, use them for dens and shelter. If we are lucky, it might be holed up there." They continued following the tracks as long as the light allowed, then made a cold camp in a sheltered spot among some cedar trees. Without a fire, the night was dark and cold, and Natalie found herself huddling in her blanket and trying not to think about the glowing eyes she imagined watching them from the shadows. Jameson must have sensed her unease because he moved his bedroll closer to hers. "Try to get some sleep. I will keep first watch." "Do you really think it might come for us tonight?" Natalie whispered. "I think it might, but I also think it will be cautious. We are alert and armed, and the wolf prefers easier prey. Still, no sense taking chances." He paused, then added, "You are doing well out here, Natalie, better than most would. I know this is not easy." The compliment warmed her more than she expected. "Thank you. I am trying not to slow you down." "You are not slowing me down at all. Actually, you are holding up better than some of the men I have ridden with, and you are a lot better company." Natalie smiled despite her anxiety. "That might be the nicest thing anyone has said to me in months." She managed to sleep in fits and starts, waking at every small sound. Once, she could have sworn she heard something large moving through the brush nearby, but when she sat up and looked around, Jameson was alert and calm, his rifle ready but not aimed at anything in particular. He caught her eye and shook his head slightly, indicating there was no immediate danger. She laid back down and eventually drifted off again. Dawn of the third day broke gray and misty, with low clouds obscuring the hilltops and creating an eerie, dreamlike quality to the landscape. They ate a quick breakfast of dried meat and stale bread, then resumed following the wolf's trail. The tracks led them through increasingly rugged country, across rock slabs where they had to dismount and search carefully for any sign of the animal's passage. "It is being smart about its route," Jameson observed, "staying on hard ground where it does not leave clear prints. We might lose the trail if we are not careful." But Natalie was learning to see the signs he saw. A tuft of gray fur caught on a thorny bush, a partial print in a rare patch of soft earth, places where rocks had been disturbed recently. She pointed out a spot where it looked like something heavy had scraped against a tree trunk, and Jameson confirmed it was likely the wolf marking its territory. Around midday, they reached the area where Jameson had said the caves would be. The landscape here was dominated by limestone formations riddled with openings, some no larger than a person's fist, others big enough to ride a horse through. The wind whistled through the rocks, creating a low, mournful sound that set Natalie's nerves on edge. "We need to check each cave carefully," Jameson said, dismounting. "But we cannot risk getting trapped inside if the wolf is in one of them. I will go in first. You cover the entrance in case it tries to bolt past me." "That seems unnecessarily dangerous for you," Natalie protested. "Why not throw something in first, try to flush it out?" "Because if it is in there and we make it angry, it might come out fighting instead of running. Better to approach carefully, give it a chance to flee if it wants to." They spent the afternoon methodically investigating the caves, a process that was nerve-wracking and exhausting. Each time Jameson disappeared into a dark opening with only his lantern for light, Natalie stood outside with her rifle raised, heart pounding, expecting at any moment to hear sounds of an attack. But cave after cave proved empty, showing no sign that the wolf had ever used them as a den. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, they were both frustrated and tired. "Maybe I was wrong," Jameson admitted. "Maybe the wolf is not using these caves after all. Or maybe it was using them and moved on," Natalie suggested. "The tracks we found were several days old. It could be miles from here by now. You are right. We should make camp and decide on a new strategy." Jameson looked around, assessing their surroundings. "There is a good spot up on that rise where we would have a clear view of the area. We could risk a small fire up there, since the rocks would hide the light from below." They climbed to the rise and established their camp. Jameson did build a fire, a tiny one that gave off more heat than light, and they huddled close to it as the temperature dropped with nightfall. The sky had cleared, revealing a spectacular display of stars that seemed close enough to touch in the clean air. "You ever wonder what happens after?" Natalie asked, staring up at the celestial display. "After we find the wolf, after all of this is done, do you think about what comes next?" "Sometimes," Jameson admitted. "I try not to plan too far ahead because I have learned that plans have a way of falling apart. But yeah, I think about it. I think about maybe using my share of the bounty to finally buy some land, even if it is not the spread Thomas and I wanted. Start small, build something with my own hands. What about you?" "I think about going somewhere new, somewhere that does not have memories of Emma around every corner. Maybe California, maybe Colorado like Emma and her fiancé had planned. I think about finding work as a teacher or a seamstress, something respectable that would give me a stable life. And sometimes, when I am feeling particularly hopeful, I think about maybe finding someone to share that life with. Someone kind and patient who would not mind that I am a little broken inside." "You are not broken," Jameson said firmly. "You are grieving and you are angry and you are hurt, but broken implies something that cannot be fixed, and I do not think that is true about you. I think you are one of the strongest people I have ever met." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected kindness in his words. "You do not know me well enough to say that. I know you well enough to see that you rode out here alone to hunt a monster that has killed dozens of people. I know you have not complained once about the hard riding or the cold nights or the danger. I know you keep your weapons clean and your horse cared for before you see to your own comfort. That tells me plenty about your character." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling softly between them. Natalie found herself studying Jameson's profile in the flickering light, noticing details she had not paid attention to before. The strong line of his jaw, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners even when he was not smiling. He was handsome in a rugged, weathered way that spoke of a hard life lived outdoors. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. "You can ask. I might not answer, but you can ask. Have you ever been in love?" Jameson was quiet for so long that Natalie thought he might not respond. Then he said, "Once. Her name was Catherine, and she was the daughter of the ranch owner where I was working about 4 years ago. She was beautiful and smart and completely out of my league, but somehow she seemed to like me anyway. We courted for about 6 months, and I was actually starting to think about asking her to marry me. Then her father found out about us and made it very clear that his daughter was not going to waste herself on a penniless ranch hand with no prospects. He gave me a choice, leave immediately or he would have me arrested on some trumped-up charge. I left." "That is horrible," Natalie said. "Did you ever see her again?" "No. I heard later that she married a banker's son from Dallas. I hope she is happy, though I doubt it. Her father was the type who cared more about status than his daughter's actual happiness. Jameson poked at the fire with a stick. What about you? Ever been in love? Not really. There was a boy in school I had a crush on when I was 16, but that was just childish infatuation. After our parents died, I did not have time for courting or romance. Emma and I were too busy trying to survive. There was a man who worked at the bank in our town who showed some interest, but he was nearly 40 and kept talking about how he needed a wife to cook and clean for him. I was not interested in being anyone's unpaid servant. Good for you. You deserve better than that. The fourth day dawned cold and clear, with frost coating the grass and rocks around their camp. They packed up and continued tracking the wolf, following a trail that had grown fainter and more difficult to read. Jameson's skill as a tracker was the only reason they did not lose it entirely. He could read meaning in the smallest disturbance. A stone turned over to expose its darker underside, a tiny tuft of fur, even the way certain plants were bent suggesting something had passed through recently. They were following the wolf's trail along a ridgeline when Jameson suddenly froze, his hand shooting up in a signal to stop. Natalie halted her mare immediately, her hand going to her rifle. Jameson dismounted silently and crept forward, examining something on the ground that Natalie could not see from her position. When he returned, his expression was grim. Fresh kill. The wolf took down a deer sometime this morning, probably just a few hours ago. The carcass is still warm. Does that mean it is close? Natalie asked, her pulse quickening. Very close. Maybe within a mile or two. We need to be ready for anything. He checked his rifle, ensuring a round was chambered. From here we go on foot. The horses make too much noise and we cannot maneuver as well while mounted. We will tie them here and continue on foot. They secured the horses in a small grove of trees where there was some grass to graze on, then proceeded on foot with Jameson in the lead. The landscape here was a maze of rocks and cedar breaks, perfect ambush country. Natalie tried to watch everywhere at once, her nerves singing with tension. They had been walking for perhaps 20 minutes when Jameson stopped again, this time pointing to something ahead. Natalie followed his gesture and felt her breath catch. On a flat rock about 50 yards away was a massive wolf, easily as large as a small pony, with gray fur that seemed to shimmer silver in the afternoon sun. It was watching them with eyes that gleamed with an intelligence that was deeply unsettling. "That is it," Jameson whispered. "That is the wolf." The creature made no move to flee or attack. It simply sat there, regarding them with what looked disturbingly like curiosity. Natalie raised her rifle slowly, sighting down the barrel, trying to keep her hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. The wolf was well within range for a good shot. "Wait," Jameson breathed. "Something is not right. It should not just be sitting there like that. It is too exposed, too vulnerable." As if in answer to his concern, Natalie heard a sound behind them, a low, rumbling growl that made every hair on her body stand on end. She spun around to see a second wolf, just as large as the first, emerging from the rocks they had just passed. It was blocking their path back to the horses. "Oh hell," Jameson muttered. "There are two of them. The one we have been tracking and its mate. That is why it has been so hard to predict its movements. They have been hunting together." The wolf behind them took a step forward, lips pulling back to reveal teeth that looked like they could tear through bone. The wolf in front had risen to its feet and was also advancing slowly. They were being flanked, trapped between two of the deadliest predators in the territory. "We need to get to higher ground," Jameson said, his voice remarkably calm given the circumstances. "Those rocks to our left, the tall ones. If we can get up there, they cannot surround us." On three, we run. 1, 2, 3, they sprinted for the rocks, and the wolves reacted instantly. The one behind them let out a howl that was answered by the one in front, and both creatures charged. Natalie ran faster than she had ever run in her life, her boots slipping on loose gravel, her rifle clutched in one hand. She could hear Jameson beside her, could hear the terrifying sound of the wolves closing the distance behind them. They reached the rocks and started climbing, scrambling up the rough limestone using hands and feet. Natalie's rifle banged against her back where she had slung it, and she skinned her knuckles on the sharp stone, but she did not stop. Below them, one of the wolves leaped, its jaws snapping closed just inches from Jameson's boot. They reached a ledge about 15 feet off the ground and turned to face their attackers. Both wolves were circling the base of the rocks, looking up at them with those unsettling, intelligent eyes. They were truly massive creatures, far larger than any normal wolf. The one on the left had a distinctive white patch on its chest, while the other had a torn ear. "Can you shoot from here?" Jameson asked, bringing his own rifle to bear. "Yes," Natalie said, trying to slow her breathing enough to aim properly. She sighted on the wolf with the white patch, the one they had seen first. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Before she could fire, both wolves suddenly turned and ran, disappearing into the cedar breaks with a speed that seemed impossible for creatures their size. Within seconds, they were gone, leaving only the echo of their departure and two humans with pounding hearts standing on a rocky ledge. "What just happened?" Natalie asked, lowering her rifle slowly. "Why did they run?" "I do not know," Jameson admitted. "Maybe they decided we were too much trouble. Or maybe they are waiting for us to come down so they can try again when we are more vulnerable." He scanned the surrounding area carefully. "We need to get back to the horses before they do. If those wolves kill our mounts, we are stranded out here." The climb down was even more nerve-wracking than the climb up, both of them expecting at any moment for the wolves to reappear. But they made it to the ground without incident and hurried back toward where they had left the horses, moving as quickly as they dared while still watching for an ambush. To their relief, the horses were where they had left them, nervous and wide-eyed but unharmed. The animals had clearly smelled the wolves and were ready to bolt. It took several minutes of soothing words and gentle handling before Jameson and Natalie could calm them enough to mount. "We need to find a defensible position before dark," Jameson said. "Somewhere the wolves cannot get to us easily. I saw a small cabin marked on my map, about an hour's ride east of here. It is an old line shack that ranchers use sometimes. It might be abandoned, but it would give us walls and a roof." They found the cabin just as the sun was setting. It was a crude structure, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it had a sturdy door and shutters that could be closed over the single window. The interior smelled of dust and old smoke, and there was evidence that someone had used it recently, probably hunters or cowboys passing through. They brought the horses inside with them, cramming all 4 of them into the small space. It was tight and uncomfortable, but it was safer than leaving the animals outside where the wolves could get to them. Jameson barricaded the door with a heavy beam, and they took turns watching through the cracks in the shutters for any sign of their pursuers. "I think we need to talk about what we are dealing with here," Jameson said as full dark settled over the landscape. "Those are not normal wolves, Natalie. Normal wolves do not grow that large, and they do not hunt with that kind of coordinated intelligence. I do not know what they are exactly, but they are something more than just animals." "What are you suggesting? That they are supernatural somehow?" Natalie tried to keep the skepticism out of her voice. "I am suggesting that the rules we think we know about hunting might not apply here. These creatures are smart enough to set traps, to work together in ways that wolves normally do not. We got lucky today. If we had been a little slower getting to those rocks, we would be dead right now." Natalie could not argue with that assessment. "So what do we do? We cannot claim the bounty if we cannot kill them, but we also cannot kill them if we cannot get close enough to take a shot. We need a better plan. We need to think like they do, anticipate their moves." Jameson paced in the small cabin, his mind clearly working through possibilities. "They hunt together, which means they are never far apart. If we can somehow separate them, deal with them one at a time, we might have a chance. How do we separate them? I do not know yet. Let me think on it." He settled down with his back against the wall, his rifle across his knees. "You should try to get some sleep. I will wake you in a few hours for your watch." But sleep was difficult to find. Natalie lay in the darkness listening to the horses shifting nervously and the sound of wind whistling through gaps in the walls. Once, she heard something scratching at the door, something large and persistent. Jameson heard it too and moved to the door with his rifle ready, but whatever it was eventually moved away. The 5th day of their hunt dawned gray and windy, with clouds racing across the sky and the smell of rain in the air. They debated staying in the cabin, but decided that remaining stationary made them sitting targets. Better to keep moving, try to find some advantage they could exploit. They rode through increasingly rough country, always alert for any sign of the wolves. Jameson's mood had become darker, more focused. He barely spoke except to point out tracks or hazards in their path. Natalie understood. They were running out of time and options, and every hour that passed without resolving this hunt was an hour they remained in danger. Around midday, they came across something that made them both stop and stare. In a small clearing, arranged in a deliberate pattern, were the bones of the wolves' previous kills. Deer, cattle, and horrifyingly, what looked like human remains, all laid out in a rough circle with skulls placed at cardinal points like some kind of macabre monument. "They did this," Jameson said, his voice hollow. "The wolves. They created this deliberately. Animals do not do things like this." Natalie felt sick looking at the display. Among the bones, she could see scraps of clothing, a boot, a woman's hair ribbon that might have been white once but was now stained dark. This is evil. Whatever these creatures are, they are evil, or they are trying to communicate something. A warning maybe, or a claim to territory. Jameson dismounted and approached the bone circle carefully. "Look at the way the skulls are positioned. They are all facing outward like they are watching for intruders. This is a boundary marker of some kind. Which means we are in the heart of their territory now," Natalie realized. "They know we are here. They have been watching us this whole time, playing with us." As if to confirm her words, a howl rose from somewhere nearby, long and eerie and definitely closer than Natalie wanted it to be. It was answered by a second howl from a different direction. The wolves were calling to each other, coordinating. "We need to move, now." Jameson remounted quickly. "They are setting up another ambush. We cannot let them dictate the terms of this fight." They rode hard, putting distance between themselves and the bone circle. The howls continued to echo around them, sometimes close, sometimes farther away, always keeping them on edge. The sky continued to darken as storm clouds rolled in, and the first fat drops of rain began to fall. "There," Jameson shouted over the rising wind, pointing to a formation of rocks ahead. "We make our stand there. High ground, clear fields of fire, and our backs protected. It is the best defensive position we are going to find." They reached the rocks just as the sky opened up, rain pouring down in sheets that reduced visibility to a few yards. They dismounted and quickly set up their position, using their saddles as makeshift barriers and checking their weapons to ensure they were ready. The horses were secured in a sheltered spot between rocks, where they would be somewhat protected from both the weather and the wolves. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by a crack of thunder that made the ground shake. In that brief moment of illumination, Natalie saw them, both wolves, circling their position at a distance of maybe 50 yards. They were moving in opposite directions, never stopping, never giving a clear shot. "They are waiting for us to make a mistake," Jameson said, water streaming down his face. "Waiting for us to panic or run or do something stupid. We need to be patient, wait for our moment." "I have an idea," Natalie said suddenly. "What if we give them what they want? What if one of us runs, draws them in close while the other stays hidden and shoots? That is insane. Whoever runs would almost certainly die. Not if we do it right. Not if the runner has a clear path to safety and the shooter is fast enough." Natalie's mind was racing, putting together a plan. "There is a narrow passage through those rocks behind us. I saw it when we rode up. It is too narrow for the wolves to follow, but a person could get through. If I run for that passage and you stay here, hidden, the wolves will chase me. They will have to come close to do it, and that is when you shoot." "No, absolutely not. I am not using you as bait." "Do you have a better idea?" Natalie challenged. "We cannot just sit here and wait for them to pick us off, and we cannot keep running forever. At some point we have to face them, and this might be our best chance." Jameson looked torn, his jaw working as he ground his teeth together. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, but we do it my way. I will be the one who runs. You are the better shot with the rifle. I have seen you practicing. Your hands are steadier than mine." Jameson, "No, yes, this is not up for debate. If we are doing this, I am the bait. You make sure those shots count." He handed her his rifle, which had a better scope than hers. "Give me exactly 10 seconds to get into position in that passage. Then start shooting. Do not hesitate. Do not wait for a perfect shot. Just keep firing until they are down, or I am safe." Before Natalie could argue further, he was moving, sprinting across the open ground toward the passage. The wolves reacted instantly, both of them changing direction to intercept him. Natalie raised the rifle, sighting on the nearest wolf, the one with the white patch on its chest. She forced herself to breathe, to steady her hands, to trust her training. Jameson reached the passage and turned, his revolver drawn. The first wolf was almost on him, its jaws open, ready to tear into him. Natalie fired. The shot took the wolf high in the shoulder, spinning it around and knocking it off its feet. It yelped, a sound of pain and surprise, and scrambled to regain its footing. The second wolf, seeing its mate injured, turned toward Natalie with a snarl of pure rage. She worked the rifle's action, chambering another round, and fired again. This shot was not as clean, catching the second wolf in the haunch as it ran. The creature stumbled but did not go down. It changed direction, heading for cover in the rocks. Jameson fired his revolver repeatedly, forcing it to dodge and weave. Natalie tracked it with the rifle, waiting for a clear shot. The first wolf had recovered and was limping toward Jameson, favoring its injured shoulder but still moving with deadly intent. Jameson fired his last round and the hammer clicked on an empty chamber. He turned and ran deeper into the passage, the wolf right behind him. Natalie could not get a shot without risking hitting Jameson. She dropped the rifle and drew her own revolver, running toward the passage. She reached it just in time to see the wounded wolf lunge at Jameson, catching him by the leg and dragging him down. Without thinking, acting purely on instinct, Natalie aimed and fired 3 times in rapid succession. At least 2 of her shots hit home. The wolf released Jameson and turned toward her, blood streaming from its chest and mouth. It took 1 step, then another, its eyes locked on her with hatred that seemed almost human. Then its legs gave out and it collapsed, shuddered once and went still. Natalie rushed to Jameson, who was struggling to sit up. His leg was bleeding badly where the wolf's teeth had torn through his pants and into the flesh beneath. "How bad is it?" she asked, already pulling off her bandana to use as a makeshift bandage. "I have had worse," he lied, his face pale with pain. "Did you get them both? One is dead for sure. The other ran off wounded. I do not think it will get far. We need to be certain. A wounded animal is the most dangerous kind." Jameson tried to stand and nearly fell. Natalie caught him, supporting his weight. "You are not going anywhere on that leg. Sit down and let me bind this properly. Then I will go find the other wolf and finish this." "The hell you will. We stay together." "Jameson, you can barely stand. I will be faster and quieter alone." "Just stay here, stay hidden, and keep your gun loaded. I will be back before you know it." She could see him wanting to argue, but the pain and blood loss were making it difficult for him to form coherent protests. Finally, he nodded. "Be careful, please." "I will." She made sure his wounds were bandaged as well as she could manage, then retrieved the rifle and set off following the blood trail left by the second wolf. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the ground was muddy and slick. The blood trail was easy to follow, stark red against the gray-brown earth. Natalie moved carefully, rifle at the ready, expecting at any moment for the wounded animal to attack from ambush. She found it about 100 yards from their position, lying behind a fallen tree. The wolf was still alive but fading fast, its breathing labored and bubbles of blood forming at its mouth. When it saw Natalie approach, it tried to rise, tried to bare its teeth in defiance, but it did not have the strength. Natalie raised the rifle, sighting on the creature's head. She should have felt triumph or satisfaction or relief. Instead, she just felt tired and sad. This animal had killed so many people, including Emma, including Jameson's brother. It deserved to die. But looking at it now, suffering and helpless, she could not help but feel a strange kind of pity. "I am sorry," she whispered, though she was not sure what she was apologizing for. "But you cannot hurt anyone else." She pulled the trigger. The wolf jerked once and then went still. It was over. Natalie stood there for a long moment, rain dripping from her hat, her entire body shaking with reaction to the adrenaline and stress of the past hour. Then she turned and walked back to where she had left Jameson, the weight of what they had accomplished settling over her like a heavy cloak. The 6th day of their journey was spent recovering and resting. Jameson's leg wound was serious but not life-threatening, and with proper care, it would heal without permanent damage. They had dragged the bodies of both wolves back to their camp and skinned them carefully, knowing they would need proof of the kill to claim the bounty. The pelts were massive, far larger than any normal wolf skin. Looking at them laid out in the rain, Natalie could understand why people had thought these creatures were supernatural. They were magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. "We should rest here another day," Natalie said, checking Jameson's bandages. "You need to keep that leg elevated and still. If we push too hard and the wound reopens, you could bleed out before we reach a doctor." "We cannot afford to waste time," Jameson protested weakly. "We need to get these pelts back to Austin and claim the bounty before they start to rot." "The pelts will keep for a few days if we salt them properly. Your life is more important than the money, Jameson. We are staying." He did not have the strength to argue further. Over the course of that day and the next, Natalie took care of him, changing his bandages, making sure he ate and drank enough, and keeping watch while he slept. It gave her time to think about what came next, about what she would do now that the mission that had consumed her for weeks was finally complete. She realized, somewhat to her surprise, that she did not want to say goodbye to Jameson. Over the course of their 6 days together, he had become important to her in ways she was only beginning to understand. He was brave and skilled and thoughtful, but more than that, he understood her grief in a way no one else could. They had been through something profound together, had saved each other's lives, had faced death and come out the other side. On the evening of what would have been their 7th day on the trail, as they sat by a small fire and shared a simple meal, Jameson spoke the words that had been hanging unspoken between them. "What happens when we get back to Austin?" he asked quietly. "We collect the bounty, split it between us, and then what? Go our separate ways?" "I do not know," Natalie admitted. "I have been trying not to think about it because the thought of saying goodbye makes me feel hollow inside, and I do not fully understand why." "I think I understand why," Jameson said. He set down his plate and looked at her directly, his blue eyes serious in the firelight. "Natalie, these past days with you have been the first time since Thomas died that I have felt like I had a reason to keep going. You are smart and brave and so damn strong it sometimes takes my breath away. I know we have not known each other long, but I feel like I know the important parts of you, the parts that matter. And I do not want to lose that. I do not want to lose you." Natalie's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "What are you saying exactly?" "I am saying that I think I am falling in love with you. I am saying that the thought of going back to my life alone, without you in it, is worse than facing down 100 wolves. I am saying that I know it is probably too soon and too complicated and maybe too crazy, but I would like the chance to see if maybe you might feel the same way. Eventually, if you do not already." The raw honesty in his voice made Natalie's throat tight with emotion. "I do feel the same way," she whispered. "I have been trying not to because it seems impossible. We have only known each other a week. People do not fall in love in a week." "Why not? We have lived more in this week than most people live in a year. We have trusted each other with our lives, shared our worst memories, faced our demons together. If that is not a foundation for love, I do not know what is." Natalie found herself moving closer to him, drawn by something she could not quite name. "My whole life I have been practical. I have made sensible decisions, thought things through, never acted on impulse. And where has it gotten me? My parents died anyway. Emma died anyway. Maybe it is time I stopped being so careful and just took a chance on something that feels right, even if it does not make logical sense." "Does this feel right?" Jameson asked, reaching out to take her hand. "Yes," Natalie said, intertwining her fingers with his. "Terrifyingly right." He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she wanted to. She did not want to. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and tentative, a question more than a demand. Natalie answered by kissing him back, pouring into it all the feelings she had been trying to suppress, all the hope and fear and desperate need for connection that had been building inside her. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Jameson was smiling for the first time since she had met him. "So what do you say, Natalie Graham? When we get back to Austin and claim that bounty, would you consider staying with me? We could use the money to buy that land I told you about, start that horse ranch Thomas and I always dreamed of. It would not be easy, and I know I come with a lot of baggage, but I promise I would spend every day trying to make you happy." "Yes," Natalie said without hesitation. "Yes to all of it. To the ranch, to staying with you, to building something together. I spent so long thinking my life ended when Emma died, but maybe it was just beginning. Maybe I needed to go through all of that pain to find my way to you." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about the future in a way that felt both exciting and healing. They would go back to Austin, claim the bounty, and then head north to look at the property Jameson had mentioned. They would start small, just a few horses at first, and build slowly. Natalie would keep her painting supplies and start capturing the beauty of the Texas landscape. Jameson would teach her everything he knew about training horses. They would build a life together, one day at a time. That night, they slept curled together for warmth and comfort, Natalie's head resting on Jameson's chest so she could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong. For the first time in months, her dreams were not haunted by Emma's death or the terrifying wolf. Instead, she dreamed of a small ranch house with a porch, of horses running free in green pastures, of a future that looked nothing like the past. They rode back into Austin on a bright afternoon 10 days after they had left, leading their pack horses with the wolf pelts secured and preserved. Word of their success had somehow preceded them, maybe carried by a passing traveler or a rancher who had heard the story. A crowd had gathered in front of the sheriff's office, people craning to get a look at the massive pelts that proved the notorious wolves were finally dead. The sheriff himself came out to greet them, his expression a mix of relief and amazement. "I will be damned. You actually did it. Both of you are alive and you killed both wolves. I did not think it was possible." "Neither did we at times," Jameson admitted, dismounting carefully to favor his healing leg. "But Miss Graham here is the finest shot I have ever seen and the bravest partner anyone could ask for." "Mr. Cross is too modest," Natalie said, also dismounting. "If not for his tracking skills and his quick thinking, we would both be dead." This was a team effort. The bounty was paid in gold coin, counted out carefully by the territorial treasurer who had been summoned for the occasion. $300 split between them meant $150 each, more money than Natalie had ever seen in one place. It represented freedom, opportunity, a chance to start fresh. But even more valuable than the gold was the man standing beside her, his hand finding hers in the crowd, his smile bright with hope and love. They had gone into the wilderness as strangers bound by grief and vengeance. They had come back as partners, as friends, as two people who had found in each other something worth living for. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. They purchased supplies for starting their ranch, including tools, seed for crops, and most importantly, 3 young horses with good bloodlines that Jameson swore would be the foundation of their herd. They found a preacher willing to marry them in a simple ceremony with the sheriff and his wife as witnesses, because waiting seemed pointless when they were both so certain about what they wanted. Natalie wore a simple dress she bought at the general store, nothing fancy but clean and new. Jameson wore his best shirt and had actually shaved for the occasion. When the preacher asked if they would love and honor each other for as long as they both lived, they answered together, their voices strong and sure, "We will." The property Jameson had been eyeing was everything he had promised. 200 acres of good grazing land with a creek running through it, enough timber for building, and a view of the hills that made Natalie's fingers itch to paint. There was no house, just the remains of an old cabin that would need to be torn down and rebuilt, but that was fine. They would build their home together, literally and figuratively. The first year was hard in the way that all new ventures are hard. They lived in a tent while they worked on building a proper cabin, their days filled with back-breaking labor and their nights with exhausted sleep. But there were moments of pure joy too. The first time their foundation mare gave birth to a healthy foal, the day the cabin's roof was finally completed and they could sleep without worrying about rain, the evening Natalie finished her first painting of their land, and Jameson declared it beautiful enough to hang in a museum. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the small intimacies that come with building a life together. Jameson sang while he worked, old songs his father had taught him. Natalie talked to the horses like they were people, giving each one a distinct personality in her mind. They had their disagreements, of course, about everything from the best way to train a young horse to where the vegetable garden should go. But they learned to talk through their differences, to compromise and to choose their battles. In the spring of their second year on the ranch, Natalie realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mix of emotions: joy at the thought of bringing new life into the world, but also fear because she had lost so many people she loved. Jameson, sensing her anxiety, held her close and promised that they would face whatever came together, that she was not alone in this. Their son was born on a crisp October morning, delivered by a midwife from the nearest town, with Jameson pacing anxiously outside until he heard the baby's first cry. They named him Thomas, after the brother Jameson had lost, and Emma, after Natalie's sister, giving the child a middle name that honored both their griefs and their healing. Holding her son for the first time, Natalie felt something shift inside her, some last piece of the brokenness she had carried clicking into place. This child would never know Emma except through the stories Natalie would tell, would never meet Thomas Cross except through his father's memories. But he would grow up loved and safe, surrounded by the family his parents had built from the ashes of their losses. The ranch grew slowly but steadily over the years. Their horses gained a reputation for being smart and well-trained, and customers came from miles around to purchase or trade for their stock. They hired a few hands to help with the work, young men looking for honest employment and a fair wage. The cabin expanded to become a proper house, with multiple rooms and a porch where Natalie would sit in the evenings to paint the changing light over the hills. 3 years after Thomas was born, they welcomed a daughter they named Sarah. She had her father's blue eyes and her mother's stubborn determination, and from the moment she could walk, she was following Jameson around the ranch, insisting she could help with the horses. Then came another son, Jacob, who was quiet and thoughtful, content to spend hours watching his mother paint or reading the books they ordered from catalogs. Life was not always easy. There were drought years when the grass turned brown and they worried about feeding their growing herd. There were illnesses and injuries, heartbreaks and setbacks. But through it all, Jameson and Natalie faced each challenge together, their love deepening with each passing year into something solid and unshakable. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep and the ranch was settled for the night, they would sit together on their porch and remember that week in the wilderness when 2 grieving strangers had found each other. They would talk about the wolves sometimes, about the terror and the determination, and the moment they had both realized they did not want to say goodbye. "Do you ever regret it?" Jameson asked one such evening, his arm around Natalie's shoulders as they watched the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Coming out here with me, building this life instead of going to California or Colorado like you planned." "Not for a single second," Natalie answered honestly. "This life with you, these children, this ranch we built together, it is better than anything I could have imagined for myself. I thought my story ended when Emma died, but really it was just the end of one chapter. The real story, the one worth telling, started when I met you." "I feel the same way," Jameson said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You gave me a reason to keep living when I thought I had nothing left. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose. I know Thomas would have liked you very much. He always said I needed someone who would challenge me and keep me honest. I wish I could have met him, and I wish Emma could have met you. She would have approved, I think. She always said I needed someone who could match my stubbornness." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence that only comes when 2 people are completely at ease with each other. In the distance, they could hear the horses moving in their pasture, the soft sounds of the creatures that had become not just their livelihood but their passion. "Do you think about the wolves much anymore?" Natalie asked. "Sometimes," Jameson admitted. "Usually when I am tracking something or teaching one of the hands about reading sign. I remember how smart they were, how they hunted together, how close we came to dying. But mostly I think about how those 6 days led me to you, and I cannot bring myself to regret anything that brought us together." As the years continued to pass, the ranch thrived and their family grew in love and connection. Thomas, their eldest, showed a natural talent for training horses, able to gentle even the most skittish animals with patience and quiet confidence. Sarah became an expert rider, fearless in the saddle and determined to prove she could do anything her brothers could do. Jacob discovered a love of numbers and began keeping the ranch's books with a precision that impressed even his parents. Natalie continued to paint, her work becoming more refined and confident with practice. She painted the ranch in all seasons, the horses in all their moods, and portraits of her family that captured moments of everyday beauty. Jameson teaching Thomas to throw a rope, Sarah braiding her horse's mane, Jacob reading by lamplight. She painted Emma too, from memory, trying to capture her sister's smile and spirit so that her children would know the aunt they had never met. The bounty money that had started everything was long since spent, invested in the ranch and the family. But neither Jameson nor Natalie measured their wealth in gold anymore. They measured it in the sound of their children's laughter, in the sight of healthy horses running free, in the comfortable weight of the other's hand during quiet moments, in the life they had built from tragedy and loss. When visitors came to the ranch and heard that Jameson and Natalie had met while hunting the notorious wolves of the hill country, they were always curious about the details. The children loved hearing the story, even though they had heard it dozens of times before. They would beg their parents to tell about the bone circle, about the final battle in the rain, about how their father had been brave and their mother had been a crack shot. Jameson and Natalie would oblige, though they always edited the story for younger ears, emphasizing the teamwork and determination while downplaying the true danger they had faced. But sometimes, when the children were older and could understand, they would share the whole truth. The fear, the grief that had driven them, the moment when they both thought they would die, and the equally powerful moment when they realized they wanted to live together. 20 years after that fateful hunt, on their anniversary, Jameson presented Natalie with a gift. It was a small wooden box, beautifully carved with images of horses and hills. Inside was a small piece of silver fur, carefully preserved and mounted. "From the first wolf," Jameson explained. "I kept this piece all these years because I never wanted to forget what we survived, what we overcame. That hunt brought us together, but more than that, it taught us both that we were strong enough to face anything. I look at this, and I remember the woman who rode into Austin alone, determined to track down a monster. The woman who refused to give up even when things looked hopeless. The woman I fell in love with during 6 days in the wilderness." Natalie touched the fur gently, remembering. "I look at it, and I remember the man who was drowning in grief, but still found the strength to help a stranger. The man who kept me alive with his skill and his courage. The man who taught me that it was possible to love again after losing everything." She closed the box and set it carefully on the mantel, where it would stay for the rest of their lives, a reminder of where they had been and how far they had come. Then she turned to her husband, the man who had been her partner in every sense for 2 decades, and kissed him with all the love and gratitude she felt. Their story, which had begun with death and vengeance, had transformed into something neither of them could have predicted. A tale of redemption, of healing, of two broken people finding wholeness in each other. The wolves were long dead and almost forgotten by the wider world, but Jameson and Natalie would never forget, because those 6 dangerous days in the hill country had given them everything that mattered. As they grew older, they found joy in watching their children build their own lives. Thomas took over most of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, eventually marrying a schoolteacher from Austin who shared his quiet competence. Sarah shocked no one by marrying a cowboy she had met at a horse auction, someone as wild and free-spirited as she was. Jacob used his facility with numbers to start a business selling their horses across the territory, expanding their reach and their reputation. And through it all, Jameson and Natalie remained each other's constant, the partnership forged in danger and sealed in love proving strong enough to withstand whatever life threw at them. They grew gray together, their bodies slowing with age but their affection for each other never diminishing. On a warm summer evening in their 67th year, when they had been married for 44 years and the ranch was thriving under their son's capable management, they sat together on the porch they had built so long ago. Their hands were clasped, fingers intertwined in the way they had been that first night when Jameson had confessed his growing feelings. "You remember when you asked me if this felt right?" Natalie asked, her voice softer with age but still strong. "I remember everything about that night," Jameson replied. "Every word, every moment. You were right. It felt right then, and it has felt right every day since. I have never regretted taking that chance on you on us." "Neither have I. You made me believe in second chances, Natalie. You made me believe that even after the worst losses, there could still be joy and purpose and love. So much love." They sat together as the sun set over the hills they had come to know so well, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold that Natalie had captured in hundreds of paintings, but never quite perfectly. Their children and grandchildren were scattered across the property, the sound of young voices and laughter drifting through the evening air. This was the happy ending neither of them had dared to hope for when they first met in that saloon in Austin. A life rich with meaning, a family bonded by love, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. The wolves had taken so much from them both, but in a strange way, those creatures had also given them everything by bringing them together. As the last light faded and the first stars appeared, Jameson pressed a kiss to Natalie's weathered hand. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything. For saying yes, for taking a chance, for building this life with me." "Thank you," Natalie whispered back, "for seeing me, for loving me, for giving me a reason to keep going when I thought there was nothing left. You saved my life in more ways than one." They sat together in the gathering darkness, two souls who had found each other in the wilderness and had chosen, every day since, to keep choosing each other. The wolves were dead. The grief had healed into scars they could live with, and what remained was this: love, family, and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived together. The ranch would continue for generations, the Cross family name becoming synonymous with quality horses throughout Texas and beyond. The story of how Jameson and Natalie met would become family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren, each generation finding in it their own meaning and inspiration. But for Jameson and Natalie themselves, the story was simpler than all of that. It was the story of two wounded people who had found healing in each other, who had faced their demons together and emerged stronger for it, who had built something beautiful and lasting from the ashes of their grief. It was a love story, pure and simple, forged in danger and tempered by time into something unbreakable. And when, many years later, they were finally laid to rest side by side in the small cemetery on their land, under the shade of the oak tree they had planted on their first anniversary. Their children made sure the headstone told the truth of their lives. Here lie Jameson Cross and Natalie Graham Cross, partners in all things, who found each other in the wilderness and never let go. Beloved parents, grandparents, and friends, together in life, together in death, together forever. The ranch continued, the horses ran free, and the love story that had begun with a bounty on a wolf lived on in the hearts and memories of everyone who had been touched by it. It was a legacy worth leaving, a story worth telling, a life worth living. And in the end, that was all anyone could ask for, to love deeply, to be loved in return, and to leave the world a little better than they found it. Jameson and Natalie had done all of that and more, their 6 days in the wilderness becoming the foundation for a lifetime of joy, purpose, and enduring love.